Hey everyone, just wanted to do a video to follow up on my previous video, which was called Why the United States and Russia Will Not Go to Nuclear War Over Syria. If you haven't seen that video, you may want to take a look at that one first, but this is a follow-up to that. In that video, just to give you a quick recap, I made the argument that back in 2013, the U.S. tried to get a boots-on-the-ground regime change operation in Syria. They failed. Then they tried to do it in the UK, where it failed there as well. There's no support for a boots-on-the-ground, remove Assad from power type operation on either side of the pond. Also, I would have to say that there's no support whatsoever, no public support in the United States or in Europe by the citizens for even a direct conflict with the Russians, a nuclear power. And certainly no support whatsoever for, nuclear war, Armageddon, or anything like that. The public would push back on this very, very hard. It would be a very politically disastrous thing to do for things to go to that point. And I go into much more detail in that previous video. But I wanted to start from that point and move forward because clearly there are events transpiring in Syria right now that are of consequence, that are making a lot of people very nervous, and rightly so. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, we of course know that the Russians are moving ICBMs and other types of intermediate and long-range missiles closer to their border. They are right now deploying a aircraft carrier and 5 other battleships into the Med. They are beefing up their forces all on the western border as well as in the Crimea. They are having large-scale drills in Russia and even alerting people that a nuclear war may be possible. Then on the other side, we are seeing the similar type of military buildup as well as a lot of rhetoric coming out of the State Department at the UN and the Obama administration, from the U.S. military, the State Department, the Pentagon, the CIA. I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric flying around right now. So this certainly, we have to look at what is going on and where this may be going. Now, to reiterate, I don't think what we're looking at is laying the groundwork for World War III or anything like that. I think what we're looking at is more posturing. Now, if you're the Russians and you're seeing all these activities going on, based on the fact that the United States now, since I believe 2002, under that full George W. Bush, that we now have a nuclear first strike policy. We no longer have the mutual assured destruction, nuclear option is the last option. George W. Bush proclaimed, I believe it was in 2002, that we now have a nuclear first strike policy. Okay, so that probably makes the Russians very nervous. So there's sort of a two-pronged thing going on for the Russians. They're obviously doing the wise thing, which is to make sure that in the case of the absolute worst case scenario, where you would have a conflict that would escalate into World War III, that they are fully prepared for that eventuality. But I don't think that they believe that that's going to happen, and I don't think that they are going to get baited into getting sucked into launching nukes or anything like that. I think that they are doing 2 things. Number one, preparing their defenses in the eventuality that the worst case scenario does happen. But they're primarily working to posture, to put their military assets in place in lieu of what they know is coming, which is hard-nosed negotiations. And this is exactly what the United States is doing. They know that ultimately they're going to end up in some sort of a negotiation over the Syria situation. Now, how far they're willing to take things, I don't know. But if you are in a serious, hard-nosed negotiation, you want to make sure that you are negotiating from a position of strength, not weakness. So both sides are strengthening their military forces on the ground to make sure that when they sit down and talk, that they can come from a strong point of view, because they can always say, well, you know, we do have these military assets on the ground. If that is put to you on the other side, you want to be able to say, yes, and we also have our military assets on the ground, and we are prepared to respond. So this is a lot of, it's almost like if you've ever seen a situation where two individuals maybe get into a little bit of a scuffle or something, and they kind of size one another up, and maybe there's some talk, maybe they start shouting, maybe a little pushing and shoving, but at the end of the day, it doesn't escalate into the fight. They end up walking away. They de-escalate and walk away. So I think this is really what we're looking at. Now, it is a very complex situation in Syria right now. And to understand where this may be going, I'll just touch on a little bit of background here, because you have to ask the question, why is Syria so important? I mean, they're not like the other Gulf states like Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and places like that. They are not an oil or gas production country. It's basically a desert. They don't really produce any type of gas or oil of any level that's relevant. So why so much interest in Syria? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but there really is one underlying root. It's the main root of what's driving all of this. And it has to do with two natural gas pipeline projects known as the North Stream and the South Stream gas line project. The South Stream project is a project that would take a gas pipeline from Qatar up through Syria and Turkey, and then would feed Western Europe. Then you have the North Stream pipeline, which would run a pipeline from Russia through Turkey, Syria, and would feed Western Europe from that direction. Now, the countries who are aligned together in support of the South Stream pipeline just happen to be the exact same countries that are opposed to the government of Assad and want to have him removed from power, and who are aligned together in this conflict. And that would be the primary players, which is the United States, the Western European NATO countries, Israel, and the Gulf Arab states. They are primarily the ones that are all joined together, and they are backing the group that they call the rebels, the moderate rebels. But the moderate rebels are kind of working with al-Nusra, kind of working with al-Qaeda, and even to some extent ISIS, because they have a common goal, which is to take down Assad. So all these players, while they have individual interests, share a couple of common interests. And number one is they want to take down Assad, and number two is they want that South Stream project. They want that pipeline going from Qatar up through Syria into Turkey and over into Europe. And for the Europeans, they're interested in this because they're very dependent. They get 41% of their natural gas, approximately, from the Russians. And so they don't like being so dependent on the Russians. It makes it difficult for them in negotiations, which is exactly why the Russians are so interested in being involved, because in case you don't know, the Russians are having a pretty difficult time economically. They depend greatly on gas and oil exports. It's most of their economy. And to lose that market would be absolutely devastating to them. And the United States knows this. For those of you who don't know, the United States has an overriding policy in general, from a geo-global strategic position, is to never allow any other nation to challenge their power. Specifically, they're targeting Russia and China, who are the most likely to challenge their power, and Russia is challenging their power right now. Okay, so this is part of what's driving the U.S. Now, the Russians, they are in a situation that they certainly do not want a nuclear war, but they do have to protect their interest. And that's exactly what they're doing. They know what is eventually going to happen in this situation, as does the U.S., which is eventually they're going to end up negotiating. Okay, so this is what a lot of this that we're seeing right now is all about. It's not about setting the stage for World War III. It's about setting the stage for some sort of a negotiation over the Syrian crisis. And the reason is because, and let me go back just a little bit. to the beginning of the Syrian conflict, going back about 5.5 years. This all started when there was several groups in Syria who were protesting against Assad, and he used some heavy-handed tactics, and this only caused the protesters to get even louder. Okay, so he got a little heavy-handed, and things got a little out of hand. Now, whether or not this was organic, or whether it was part of an intelligence operation from the Western countries, is you can argue that out. But we do know that once these protests started, that the Western countries allied together, United States, the Arab states, Israel, and Western Europeans, took full advantage, and they began sending foreign fighters into the fight, arming them, training them, funding them, and the whole 9 yards, to escalate the situation. In a sense, to use these foreign fighters to let them do the actual legwork on the ground to topple Assad. And they were having great success. They were making great progress for about 4 years. Then the Syrian government, Assad, realizing that he was losing the fight, decided to invite the Russians in to offer air power, air support. And then the Iranians, along with Hezbollah and some other groups coming out of Iraq that support Assad, came into the fight, and they began to turn the tide. And over the last 9 months to a year, we have seen that they have in fact turned the tide, and they are not only winning, but they are now poised on the cusp of winning this battle in Syria. It has pretty much come down now to the battle over East Aleppo. And if things stay just the way they are now, and no other assets are brought in against Assad's forces, then certainly the Assad government, along with the Russians and Iranians, are going to prevail, probably in the next 3 to 6 months. They are going to capture or take control of East Aleppo. And at that point, it's over. There will still be cleanup operations going on for a couple years. There will still be pockets of resistance and fighters out there that they'll have to contend with. But for the most part, the game is over. Now, the United States and their allies realize this. They know the game is just about up. They don't have much time. They also find themselves in the precarious situation of being right smack dab in the middle or to the end of a presidential election. Now we're just 2.5 weeks out. And you have two different candidates who are completely 180 degrees apart from one another on their position on Syria. Hillary Clinton, of course, wants the no-fly zone, and Donald Trump, which would be a step toward removing Assad. And Donald Trump doesn't care if Assad stays in power. He wants to work with the Russians to kill the terrorist. So two completely different positions. And so you can imagine that the people at the Pentagon, the State Department, and the intelligence agencies, they got to be just wrapping themselves in knots right now, trying to figure out what to do, because time is very short. They don't have very much time, and if Trump should win, their whole ball game is up. And so they're in a very interesting situation, to say in the least. And of course, you have an outgoing president who has his own interest, and I'll touch on those three players before I end this video. I'll talk about that here at the end. But just for now, let's just stay focused on the current events right now that have been taking place and will likely take place. As we know, there are a lot of military movements and a lot of political rhetoric going on, because the United States, quite honestly, there's really two things going on. Quite honestly, they are butthurt. They realize that they've basically lost this deal. If they don't do something very soon, it's going to be over. And they're basically throwing a temper tantrum. They're not getting their way. And they have a tough time with that, because in their mind, they are the hegemonic rulers of the world. This is not supposed to happen. They are supposed to be able to control everything in their minds. And the Russians, quite honestly, are making their life very difficult. And in fact, they're just about to have what everybody said wasn't possible, which is an actual military solution. That's called victory. And like I say, 3 to 6 months from now, if nothing changes on the ground, the Syrian government, along with the Russians and the Iranians and their friends, will take the initiative. They will carry the day. They'll seize Aleppo. They'll control it. And that's ball game over. So now the way I see it, the U.S. has really got really three positions they could take. Number one, they could accept defeat and walk away. That isn't going to happen. That isn't going to happen. They'll never stop. Their goal is regime change, to get rid of Assad, to put a puppet in there and let the puppet sign on to the South Stream project and give everybody on that side what they want. The Russians are not going to allow that to happen, nor is the Syrian government. And the United States is not going to quit trying. They'll continue working on this for as long as they can. And again, that goes back to who's going to be the next president, as to whether this whole program will be shut down or whether you'll get a Hillary Clinton who will put the pedal to the metal. You know, Hillary Clinton wants a no-fly zone. That's basically an act of war. You have to understand that when you say you want a no-fly zone, what you're saying is that you need to take out your adversary's air defenses, their command and control. You need to shoot all their planes on the ground, destroy them, or in the air. You need to completely eliminate their ability to carry out any air operations whatsoever or defend themselves from the air. And once you can control the skies over a country, you can pretty much run the table on them. And everybody's aware of this. So anyway, this would set up a direct confrontation. But it's possible that Hillary Clinton could lose and the powers that be would be defeated. So there's a lot on the table here, a lot of stakes. The stakes are very high, and this is what's playing out. So again, it's hard to get inside the head of these crazy people in Washington, D.C., but they understand that they have no public support for a major boots-on-the-ground regime change operation. They know that there's no great support by anyone in the country, really, for a direct conflict with Russia, and certainly nothing that would escalate to a nuclear confrontation. There's just no support for it. So they've really got two other positions that they can move into, and the first position is that they can try to stall the victory, to slow down the process. They can do that by immediately trying to get more troops into the battle against Assad's forces. They'll need to give them more weapons and better weapons. They'll need to get some more fighters in there. They'll need to get some more intelligence people on the ground, maybe some more freelance, private contractor, mercenary types on the ground, to try and drag the situation out, to try to prevent the Russians and the Syrians from having their victory. So the U.S. may say, well, we clearly aren't going to win the game right now, but if we can prolong this conflict and make it go drag on and on and on, eventually maybe the Syrian military or the citizens in Syria will just eventually just tire of all this, and they will allow or press for Assad to step down, and they will capitulate, and the U.S. can grind this thing out through a war of attrition, essentially. That is one option that they have. It would certainly, in their mind, be better than standing by and doing nothing and watching the Syrian government and the Russians and Iranians have their victory, which I don't think they're going to do. I think at the very least they will exercise this option of, and I think that's what they're doing now, is to get more fighters in there because they're being defeated. They need some guys to come in and replace the guys who are being killed. Get some more fighters in there, get them some better weapons, and continue to just drag this thing out and deny the Syrian government and the Russians their victory. That's probably the first option, and something they're probably already doing, if for no other reason than to buy them some time. But the second reason the second option they may be looking at, and why you're seeing so many military assets and so many, the war of words, the propaganda, why you're seeing so much of this happening, is because they may be trying to move to a hard negotiation. Now, this is a risky proposition, because what they could do is they could, without actually initiating a no-fly zone, what they could do is they could begin attacking Assad's forces. Now, probably with aircraft and cruise missiles. Now, they know that this would definitely get a response from the Russians. The Russians would respond possibly by shooting down a plane or some planes or knocking some missiles out with their air defense systems, which are very good. The S-300, S-400s are in place in Syria, and the Russians have said that they would exercise that option. So it is possible that what the United States may try to do, which again is risky, they may try to hit Assad's forces knowing that they're going to get the Russian response. Now, immediately, as soon as this happens, what they would do is immediately go to the UN and call for emergency crisis sort of negotiations. And in that negotiation, they would present the Russians with an alternate of choice. They would say to the Russians, wow, you've taken us here to the brink of war. World War III, nuclear Armageddon, the whole world is in fear, and you brought us here. Now we have a peace option, and that option is either we partition Syria so that the rebel-held territories, which we'll lay out where these areas will be, will have their own zone, which we'll protect and take care of, and then you, Assad, and your friends can take Damascus and the areas to the west and northwest in the north central part of Syria. Divide Syria, section it off, partition it off. This would set the stage for a long game for the United States, because once you can partition Syria, you can break it up and eventually achieve your goal. And it would also really drag the situation out, which will put financial, economic pressure on the Syrian government, as well as on the Russians, on the Iranians, because they don't have the resources that the United States and their allies have to go the long game. So they could present the Russians with this option and say, okay, we're now at the brink of war, and it's your fault, so here's our peace option to partition Syria, and if you don't do that, then it looks like it's World War III. The ball's in your court. So they could put the Russians in this very difficult position and make them look like they're either they're the ones who choose war or peace. Either they give the U.S. what they want with the partition, or they're choosing war for the whole world. It puts them into a situation where they're given two choices, neither of which are choices that would be favorable to the government of Assad or the Russians, because they know that a partition situation would eventually lead to a breakup of the country. It would lead to the U.S. being able to eventually accomplish their goal of regime change. It would just take longer. This is a risky option, but this explains why we're seeing the posturing, both with the military assets being put into place, with the heated rhetoric. Now we have the U.S. calling for war crimes hearings against the Russians. You know, we just have a lot of things going on, and I think that this is not a prelude to World War III. I think it's posturing to set the stage for negotiations which will favor only the U.S. and their allies, and put the Russians into a situation where they'll be pigeonholed into making a choice between World War III or partition. Either way, they lose. You see, this is probably what I believe is happening. There are risks with this, certainly, but the government, the United States government, as well as the Europeans and their allies, know that the Russians are not going to choose nuclear war. It's literally a last option. They do not win that game. No one really wins that game, but the Russians probably lose that game big. But the Europeans also lose big too. And this is why it probably won't happen. The citizens of Europe know that in a World War III nuclear confrontation, that countries like Germany, France, Belgium, the UK, they're going to get hit, and they're going to get hit hard, probably annihilated. So there'll be a tremendous amount of pressure on the politicians in NATO and the European NATO countries to walk this thing back, which is what the U.S. will be counting on. The U.S. hits some targets against the Syrian government. The Russians respond with a measured response. Then the Europeans, terrified of what could play out and under tremendous pressure from the citizens of Europe who are not going to be supporting any of this, this would force them to go to the UN and say, okay, we need to have a negotiated settlement. And this will all be worked out behind the scenes beforehand. It'll all be playing out like a play. Then the United States will then come and present the Russians with those two options. Either you choose war for the world or you choose peace. Peace meaning partition of Syria. That is what I think is actually going on. We're not setting the stage for World War III. We're setting the stage for negotiations, which will set the stage for giving the Russians a choice and the Syrians a choice that they really probably would have to make. And I think that they know this. So I think this is where all this is going. Now, we do have a wild card, which I haven't mentioned yet. And that wild card is Turkey. Very interesting situation here. Turkey wins either way with either pipeline. Both the North Stream and South Stream pipelines will go through Turkey. So okay, so it's an even deal there for them. They win either way. But they have a very difficult issue because they are NATO. But on the other hand, they have a relationship with Russia where they're very, very dependent on tourism. And Turkey, their tourism business is very important to their economy. They have about $50 billion worth of tourism with Russian citizens. And right now, Turkey is in some serious economic straits. In fact, their currency just got downgraded again, and they are just above junk bond status and heading toward the bottom. So they have a lot of problems, and they really can't afford to have another economic boycott from the Russian tourists, which we saw happen earlier, and it cost them. It caused Erdogan to step forward and apologize to the Russians for shooting down their jet and to start talking. And so the Turkey is a wild card, and they're a very interesting player in all of this. And of course, Erdogan, he does a pretty good job of playing both sides of the fence. Of course, the United States has a very large air base in Turkey. So they're of strategic importance, economic importance to both the Syrian and Russian side of the equation and the U.S. and the European side of the equation. It's a very interesting position that Turkey finds himself in. Now, I want to address another set of wild cards, and that is the presidential election. Again, we have Hillary Clinton, who is obviously a war hawk. The demonic ferret is how I describe her. She's a demonic ferret, and she is a warmonger. She's a neocon. She's George Bush in a Kim Jong-il uniform, is basically how I see Hillary Clinton. Now, if she attempts to impose a no-fly zone, I think that the military will advise her that that's basically an act of war, and she may have to back down from that. She stated that she would not put U.S. boots on the ground, but I don't trust her, and I don't believe her. And you're not going to defeat the Syrian government and the Russians without putting boots on the ground, because Assad enjoys the support of his military leadership and his soldiers. He's had practically no defections. They fought hard for him for 5.5 years, and with victory now right in their grasp, they're not going to part with him now. So it's a very interesting situation if Hillary should come into power, which I'm praying that she will not, but it's certainly possible. But if she does come into play, that certainly she'll line the State Department, the CIA, the DOD. I mean, it will literally be just full of foaming at the mouth, war-hungry neocons, and they will take the very hard line. They would probably try the option number 2 that I told you about trying to draw the Russians into a shooting war, which they would try to limit to just a conventional war very limited, just to the Syrian theater of operations, and they would already have planned with their European partners to move immediately after the bullets start flying and planes start getting shot down. They would move immediately for the negotiation, where they would present the Russians with the peace or war choice, in which both of those choices for the Russians are losers. So it puts them in a tough position, and I think that's where it's going to go. Now, in the event that Trump should win, which is what I'm hoping for, he will likely, hopefully he will not, get suckered into putting a bunch of neocons into his administration, although that's always a possibility. But hopefully that will not happen, and hopefully Trump will put some sane people into the State Department, the Department of Defense, and hopefully they'll exercise a rational foreign policy, which is what he's indicated all throughout his campaign, in which case he would care nothing about removing Assad. He would probably warm up relations with the U.S., and this whole thing will be de-escalated, and I think the world will be a much safer, prosperous, and certainly much more peaceful place than it will be with Hillary Clinton. But we still have one more player, and that is Barack Obama. Okay, Barack Obama has future political aspirations, make no mistake about it. He is going to continue to want to be a major player on the world stage. Not sure where he sees himself, but I can assure you he's not going to retire back to Hawaii and play golf for the rest of his life and write books. He likes being in the game way too much. His ego is way too large to step back out of the game. So Barack Obama is certainly going to want to have a big role in world politics moving forward. So what he needs right now, well, the last thing he needs is a crisis in Syria, bringing us to the brink of nuclear war with the Russians. That's the last thing he needs. What Barack Obama would like to see is probably a negotiation and some sort of a peace agreement before he leaves office. He needs that feather in his cap. He would love to be able to move on in his political career and claim credit for de-escalating the situation and getting some sort of a peace deal and being able to stick that feather in his cap. It would certainly help him for his future plans. Instigating a third world war or direct conflict with the Russians would not. So he has those political interests. But I think that we've been seeing a lot of signals coming out of Washington which indicate that the State Department, the Defense Department, the CIA no longer really care a hell of a lot about what Obama wants. In fact, I think that strike on the Syrian government forces a couple of weeks ago, where the 62 Syrian soldiers were killed, I don't think that Obama approved that. I think that was something that was done that he didn't approve of. But what's he going to do? Come out publicly and state that he's lost control of the Pentagon, of the CIA, of the State Department, and look weak? He's not going to do that. He has to just suck it up. And probably on the inside game, he's probably quite upset about it. Because again, it complicates things. Because maybe these people, the State Department, the CIA, the DOD, maybe they knew that Obama was getting ready to cut a deal which would leave Assad in power and would maybe set up future elections down the road. Maybe he was getting ready to cut a deal which they despised and didn't want any part of, and so they sabotaged Obama by launching this attack on the Syrian government forces to throw a wrench into his spokes and keep him from getting a peace negotiation in Syria. This is very likely. So this is the situation that we're facing right now. And it'll be interesting to see over the next two and a half weeks, because right now, if you're the crazies inside the Beltway, in the State Department, the DOD, and those folks, you know that if Trump gets in, your whole plan is likely going to be derailed unless you can surround him with neocons and get him to change his mind about all the things he's been saying. If you get Hillary, well, it's pedal to the metal. But you also have Obama, who's got his own interest who would like to probably have some sort of a feather in his cap, some sort of a peace deal before he leaves office. Because it's simply for Obama. It's about Obama right now. It's not about anybody else for Barack Obama. He's looking out for his own interest, as is everyone. And everyone has different interest in this deal. So that's why things are so crazy around the Syrian situation. But again, as I said in the first video, I don't think it's posturing for nuclear war. I do understand a lot of people are thinking, well, there is one other wild card that the crazies could throw into the mix, which is the false flag. I talked about that in the first video. I think it's tough to sell a false flag in the current state that we're in media-wise. The corporate media losing most of its credibility. No one trusts them, believes them. The rise of the independent and media and the alternative media. It's just a false flag is going to be very closely scrutinized. A lot of people are looking for it. We do know about the bombers and refueling planes that have been sent to Diego Garcia. We know about the painting up of the F-18s to look like Russian planes. We understand how these things work. False flag operation is something everyone's looking for. And again, that's a very, very risky proposition. Obama would not sign off on that. And it would be hard to pull off a false flag without President Obama being somewhat behind that, or willing to at least go along with it to some degree. I just don't think he would. It's not a smart play for him, for his political aspirations. And again, Obama's looking out for Obama right now, and nothing else matters to him. So I think that that's what we're looking at in this serious situation right now. Anything could happen, but I believe that what we're looking at right now is they're probably going to try to get more fighters in there with more weapons, better weapons, probably get some more contractors in there on the ground, and probably try to delay and drag this thing out and hope that Hillary is elected. I think that that's probably what they're going to do. But it's always possible that they could try the more risky option of instigating some sort of a conflict directly with the Russians, probably by attacking Syrian government troops, which they know will evoke a response, and would then put Putin in this situation in a negotiation that he would be faced with either choosing peace or war. And both of them are losing scenarios for Assad, the Syrian government, the Russians, and their plan for the Nord Stream pipeline, which is again what most of this is about. So anyway, that is the way I see it. It's still a very volatile, fluid situation. It needs to be watched very closely. You know, there is still a tiny, I'd say less than 1% chance this thing could really get out of hand, and we could be looking at some sort of a really dangerous situation. But I think ultimately what we're looking at is posturing for negotiations. I think that's what both sides are setting themselves up for, and it'll be interesting to watch how this plays out politically in the weeks moving forward. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up and maybe share it with your friends. And again, if you haven't seen the first video, why the US and Russia will not go to nuclear war over Syria, you might want to take a look at that as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.